In today's show, I am talking to Professor Tim Cole about radical interdisciplinarity, bringing in academics and researchers from across the arts and humanities STEM divide, as well as people with a different expertise from beyond the university. Tim shares with us his stories of success with high-risk experimental collaborative projects and with creating a radically different culture within the academy, as he likes to say. Professor Cole is a historian whose interests range widely over historical geographies, social and environmental histories, and the digital humanities. He is also someone who has been involved in undertaking and facilitating interdisciplinary and co-produced research projects across the arts and sciences and with creatives and communities. He is the founding director of the values-led Brigstow Institute at the University of Bristol, where he is also professor of social history. His latest role involves serving as academic advisor to the Dan David Prize to celebrate and support innovative research on all aspects of the past. His role has been to connect and support people to work well in teams, especially across the divide between academia and the world outside it. In today's show, he talks about the important interest in content, storytelling, technology and audiences coming together within the fascinating space of creative industries for better user experience. Here is the show. Tim, welcome. It is great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much. It's great to join you.
So tell us, what does the Brigstow Institute do?
So the Brigstow Institute has a focus on reimagining self and society in the 21st century. So it's really thinking about how can we understand what it means to live well in the 21st century? How can we live well together? What would well societies and well cultures, well economics, well politics look like? And I think the crucial thing with the Brigstow Institute is that to answer that question, how do we live well together? We recognize needs all sorts of disciplines. And so one of the big emphases of the Brigstow Institute is radical interdisciplinarity, bringing academics and researchers from all sorts of disciplines from across the STEM and arts and humanities divide, as well as also bringing in the expertise and the lived knowledge of people well beyond the university. So I guess that's another key thing about Brigstow, is that we recognize that to live well in the 21st century, we need more than the knowledge that's found within universities. We need to access knowledge that's also outside and beyond universities and think about how we bring all of that together. And so the other thing that we're really focusing on, as well as interdisciplinary research, is co-produced research. So research questions being framed and then explored and answered by people within and outside of the academy. So communities, businesses, not-for-profits and charity, artists, makers, technologists, as well as academics from lots of different disciplines, in a sense, coming together and exploring together what it means to be human in the 21st century and how we can live well as humans in the 21st century.
Yeah, so you mentioned co-produced research. What does it actually involve? How does it impact each participating discipline and their research practices? And why is it important?
I mean, I think it's important because of the kind of complexity of the questions that any of us are grappling with at the moment. So I think there's a wider recognition, isn't there, of the importance of systems thinkings, that actually the kinds of pressing challenges that we face as humans demand more than one body of sort of discrete expertise. And so I think there's a recognition, a general recognition to ask the kind of knotty questions and to deal with the really challenging issues that we face as individuals and as societies, that we need to draw upon a very wide range of expertise. And so that's one of the real drivers, I think, for the interdisciplinary and co-produced research that we do. And I think what's been really interesting, I think, is to see maybe an increasing sense on the part of all sorts of people, both within and outside the university, of the need for others to assist them in trying to answer the questions that they're grappling with. I think I see increasingly maybe a recognition of the limits of disciplinary knowledge, or the limits of technological knowledge, or the limits of a certain kind of expertise, which in some ways almost like forces, I guess, people to look for others to work with. to look for other skill sets and other knowledge and expertise. And so I think that's been the real driver for a lot of the interdisciplinary and co-produced research that we've been fostering, is a sense of people feeling like, hang on, this is a really big question. This is too big a question for me to solve on my own, or it's got too many complex pieces, and so I need others. And really, the Institute is all about bringing those others together. So it's really about trying to connect people and then enable them. So we have a number of different mechanisms which we deploy to then try and enable people to co-design and undertake research projects together.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what kind of projects does the Institute fund? Could you give some examples of such initiatives and the kind of collaboration they involve?
Yeah, sure. So the projects are incredibly diverse because there's so many different aspects, I guess, of living well as human beings. Maybe I could just give you a couple of examples of some of the ones at the moment. So one is a project that's thinking about video gaming and the video gaming industry, and in particular, the ways in which video gaming can be made more accessible for visually impaired players. So one of the things about video gaming is that it's very reliant upon the visual. And so there's a team that are thinking about, well, actually, what would it look like to work together with games designers to make video games that are much more accessible for visually impaired players, for a large part of society, a really important part of the society that in many ways are excluded. And so this is a kind of classic project, which is like, the big question is about inclusion and accessibility. So the big question is, well, how do we kind of reposition society so that others get to play equally? Here's a little niche area. Let's just try and experiment if we think about video gaming. And obviously what you need is all sorts of expertise here. So you need the expertise of computer science. So we've got computer scientists on that project. You've got local games industry. So we've got the computer games industry in the Bristol Bath region, where there's a very strong computer gaming industry. We've got someone from translation studies, who's an expert on translating video games for multiple audiences. We've got someone from disability studies who's particularly interested in visual impairment. We've got visually impaired people themselves who bring their own lived experience and knowledge, in particular young people who are visually impaired. And we've got people in the business of doing voiceovers. And so we bring all of that team together to experiment, to explore that idea together. So that's a kind of classic Brigstow project, is here's a bit of technology, computer science, here's a bit of arts and social sciences, here's a local industry, here's a local population and community, and actually what happens if they work together? How can they try and crack a question of how to make a more equitable and accessible society, but by just doing it in one small way? And I think that's a lot of the projects are in a sense asking a much bigger question about well-being, but actually by doing it in a much more focused way, in a much more small scale kind of way. Maybe just give you another example at the moment. Well, obviously, climate change is one of the kind of key issues of our time. And so we've done a lot of different projects around climate change. A project which is really thinking about the kind of personal experience of warming, of temperature rising. So what does it mean for temperature to rise? And how do different people experience that? And so that brings together physical geographers whose main business at the moment is thinking hard about climate change. But it also brings together literary scholars and a poet within the city, a series of artists, the local museum, individuals within the city, to try and explore and understand the lived experience of climate change and how it varies from individual to individual, and to try and capture that through a process of making. And I think that's one of the things that we really try and emphasize, is that we try and emphasize that people make something together. So in the case of the computer games, that they actually make a prototype computer game that works, that's co-designed with visually impaired people. Or in the case of those that are interested in trying to think about what does rising temperature look and feel like, that they actually create something as a group, that they make. In this case, they're going to go for a series of individual diaries of temperature, of kind of experiential temperature rise, with a whole series of people across the city, very diverse people across the city. And we really emphasize making as a methodology, because we feel like that's where people have a different set of conversations. I guess one of the challenges of the kind of work we do is that people come from very diverse backgrounds. So they come from within the academy and outside the academy. And then within the academy, they come from very different intellectual traditions, from, say, computer science or from literary studies. And so often I think we can talk at cross purposes within those kinds of interdisciplinary or co-produced collaborations. And so what we really emphasize is that people, in a sense, come together around a process of making something, some kind of intervention in the world, which is a way really of having a series of conversations and refining the research question along the way. And so for us, the output itself is important, but I guess what's more important is the process, that the output creates a kind of process, that the making together is key to, in a sense, refining and reshaping, understanding, exploring, and identifying a shared research question and attempting to offer some small intervention in the world as a result of that.
Yeah, these are great research projects. And in doing my own research on the Brigstow Institute, I was really impressed with its interest in promoting the creative and cultural economy. And in particular, this kind of collaborative projects that draw on a wider range of practices and skills than are usually actually required in academic research. So I really love this part of the Institute. But one question I have here is, what is the motivation of this kind of collaborative partnerships? Meaning, what is in for each partner, right? So most academic researchers are very comfortable in their own silos. Some disciplines even believe they do quite well on their own. So what makes people break out of their echo chambers?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. And it's a question that we ask all our teams to explore. So we very much bring that to the fore at the beginning of all of the projects. We have a one-day workshop with our cohorts, and one of the central questions we ask them there is to explore their motivations and to be really honest with the others in their project team about what their motivations are, and in a sense to navigate that we feel that it's really important that everyone's motivations are up front on the table, and what success is going to look like is very much on the table. So that's something we really explore. One thing I think I found is that a lot of the projects emerge from a sense of people having knowledge but also starting to realize where they don't have knowledge. So I guess a classic example, one of the really early projects we funded was a vet who came to us. So in Bristol, there's a really big vet school. And we've got a lot of academics that are involved in veterinary research. But he came to me and he said, I know everything there is to know about animals, but I'm really struggling with their owners. I know loads about, say, dairy cattle, but I don't really understand farmers. Or I know loads about the domestic dog, but I know very little about dog owners. And in a sense, I think I could say to him, oh, I know a lot of people that know a lot about people. Actually, the social sciences and the arts and humanities are full of scholars who know about people. And so what happened there, and I think this is a classic thing that we do in Brigstow, is to really match someone who's coming to us with a sense of, okay, I know about the animal, but I really need to know about the owners. It's to match that person with a social scientist who can say to that person, actually, I feel like I could probably help you here. And that's the project, the kind of projects we love. And it was an amazing project because it was a project in the end, which was about dogs and dog owners and public space, actually about dog fouling and about the kind of conflicts between dog owners and in particular parents with young children in the use of shared space within the city. And so we brought together a veterinary scientist, a social scientist, a whole series of community groups within the city, both dog owners and parents, to co-create a new set of solutions. And from that little project emerged a much bigger citywide agenda, which ultimately got city council funding to bring local school children into pioneering a whole series of motivations. And it was one of those kind of classic stories, I think, where the veterinary science at the end of all of this work was so pleased to have met a social scientist who could help him navigate this world that he felt really he didn't have expertise in. And so I think that's the sort of classic Brigstow project. I mean, I think the one thing I always say to researchers, whether they're academic researchers or people outside the university, is come and talk to me if you can't do what you're trying to do entirely on your own. So I think there's some research questions that are quite narrow and focused, and actually it may be okay to do that as a sole scholar. I guess what we're really interested in is those people that come to us and say, actually, the question I'm asking is too big for me, and I need others to help answer that question. And I actually think this is part of the kind of soft skills side of what we do. So a lot of what we do, because of the nature of the work, that all of the work involves collaboration, and collaboration is hard, is that I think soft skills are really important. And so I guess I'm always looking for people who maybe know their limits, because I think that can be a really good position to begin collaborating. Like I feel like if I feel like I can do it all on my own, I think I make a very bad collaborator. If I'm someone who feels like I can do certain things, but actually there's a lot of things I can't do, then I feel like I could be a great collaborator. Because in a sense, what we try and do in Brigstow is then connect you to the people who can do the things you can't do. And then together, that's when the magic happens, is when you bring all of those diverse skill sets together. I mean, I think this is the other thing about collaboration, which makes it hard, but also brilliant, is that I think the best collaborations are where you're working with people who are different from yourself, people who have very different knowledge bases and knowledge and expertise. That's also the hard thing about collaboration. is that you're working with people different from yourselves. So in some ways, I think that's one of the kind of challenges we're always grappling with. And that's where we put a lot of time and effort into not just connecting people, but also into helping support people to really work well as teams, especially across the divide between the academy and the world outside it, and those kind of internal divides, those silos that you reference within the academy.
Absolutely. Opportunities and challenges as well in interdisciplinary research. And talking about challenges as well as opportunities, how do you measure success in such exploratory collaborative partnerships, especially given the academicians and in particular the STEM disciplines' obsession with the evaluation impact metrics?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that's a great question, and it's a question that we grapple with a lot. Is what does it mean for a partnership to be successful? And I mean, I think at the very basic level, we feel like every partnership is successful if learning has taken place within it. So if there's been learning on the part of the partners. And I think that's been interesting because I feel like of all the projects that we've funded, there's maybe 2, 3. We've funded well over 120 different project teams. I think there's 3 that, in a sense, you could say failed because they didn't produce what they set out to make, or there were challenges in the way, disagreements within the team, things didn't work out. So there's 3 teams like that. But I think what's really interesting talking to those teams afterwards was that everyone had learned a lot through that process. And that what's interesting is that some of those people went on to do other collaborative projects and took on board the learning from that experience. And so for us, learning is a really important part of what we do. One thing that we try and do with these projects is we want to recognize that all of these projects are, in a sense, quite high risk. By definition, they're incredibly experimental because they're bringing people together that have never worked together before, and they're bringing really different disciplines and skill sets together, and they're often doing something that's kind of right at the edge of any disciplines. They're really pushing forward research. And so one of the things that we emphasize a lot, and I think this is where the Institute is a very values-led institute, is that I talk a lot about competent failure is okay. Incompetent failure is not okay. So we don't have any space and time for incompetent failure, but actually competent failure is okay. And to me, that's incredibly important in these kinds of projects, that if we're going to stimulate and fund new experimental partnerships that are really radically interdisciplinary, then I feel like one of the things that we as an institute have to say again and again is that it's okay to fail, because actually you can learn through that. And so we set, and are really careful to set, an environment that's very much high trust, which emphasizes the value of competent failure and the learning that can come from that. And I actually think that the success of the projects owes a lot to that we create a certain set of parameters, because I feel like then people don't just play it safe. They're not always thinking about the end of project report or the KPI that they have to hit. They can kind of dream a bit. They can be more iterative. They can be much more experimental and radical. They can really kind of push the boundaries a little bit with their research. And so I actually think that one of the secrets of what we've done is to create a certain kind of ethos or culture that enables and allows these things to happen, as well as a series of mechanisms as well. And so one thing I guess that I've been really interested in doing is not setting up a set of KPIs, but more establishing a culture. Because actually, I think it's the culture change that leads to the KPIs. I mean, what's lovely is seeing project teams publish papers, really interesting papers, give fantastic conference presentations, go on and win further funding, win funding from all sorts of places and kind of do amazing things. So it's lovely to see all that. But in a sense, I don't ever want that to be the target that I want people to aim for. I actually want to do stuff that's much more around creating a radically different culture within the academy. That's a place where actually we say competent failure is okay, because then I think people do their best work. And they do dangerous and crazy and experimental and interesting things. And so that's very much part of the culture that we've been creating. And I think, for me, Brigstow is a culture change project, first and foremost, actually, within the academy and beyond the academy.
Absolutely. Yes. Establishing the culture is so important, especially when trying to bridge STEM with arts and humanities. It is important for researchers in today's creative and cultural economy to go beyond their traditional research practices, which are based on these impact metrics, and try to rethink their research agendas and try to focus more on societal benefits, having in mind the end user. Hopefully, we're moving in that direction with the examples like yours. So you mentioned the Institute's initiatives and your country's interest as well in bridging this gap between university research and creative business. How do you see the arts, humanities, and engineering divide in the next, say, 5, 10, and even 15 years? And what role do you think academia will play in shaping the future of the creative industries?
Yeah, no, let me try and take that all together. I mean, I think there's a growing recognition of the importance within the creative industries of content and tech coming together and audiences, kind of rather than a sort of divorcing of those things, that actually there's a sense in which bringing those things together is really significant and really important within the creative. I mean, the creative industries, I think, are a really fascinating space because they bring amazing content often together with innovative technology to create kind of enticing experiences, I guess, surprising, exciting experiences for audiences. And so I think it's a space where there's a recognition that the technology matters. And so engineering, computer science are really, really important in AR, VR, immersive tech, but also brilliant storytelling is really important, and kind of rich content matters. And that often that's found within the arts and humanities. And an understanding of audiences is really important. And in particular, I think a kind of bringing of audiences much more to the center and fore. And so one of the things I guess we've always tried to emphasize within Brigstow is that rather than thinking about end users only at the end, actually bring those end users in much more upfront and early. So how can the end users themselves be part of the co-creation? How far can audiences not be the last thing you think about, but actually the first thing you think about, and those that you bring in together. And I think that's one thing that we've been really trying to work on within Bristol, partly within the Institute, within a bigger set of ways of working in the region through something we had called React, something we now call Bath and Bristol Creative Cluster, something that's just starting called My World. There's kind of a whole series of things fermenting, I think, within this region, which is seeing universities working together with the creative industries to really good effect to try and close the gap between those different elements. So to try and close the gap between technology, content, storytelling, audience, and to kind of bring it together to create really great work. And it's partly something that you see maybe happening in some of the most successful companies. I think that someone like I think it's something that Apple gets or Google gets. I think if you think of some of the kind of really major players within Silicon Valley, I think they get the value of engineering and design and arts and humanities and audiences coming together. And I think that's something that is really core to what's happening within this region, where I'm lucky to be based, where you've got a really rich creative industry sector and a number of universities that are really open for business and ready to work with them in interesting ways, and where I feel like we can bring our different skill sets to bear so that the engineers amongst us bring innovative work around, say, processing, or around creating motion capture or immersive technologies. The arts and humanities scholars bring amazing content, historical, imaginative, they bring brilliant storytelling. Creatives bring a set of aesthetic understandings and ways of working, imagination and creativity. And there's social scientists who bring the audience into the picture as well, and in particular bring co-produced research methodology. And I think that's the stuff that's happening in Bristol and Bath at the moment, which is really an exciting thing to be part of. And so I feel like there's some really great work being developed that's trying to bring those together. And I guess my hope is that's the future for the creative industries, is those kinds of collaborations. And in particular, I think, I wonder if there is greater recognition that there's a kind of danger in creating things in silos, and that actually bringing things together, so for example, I think there's a recognition that it's kind of crazy in some ways just to create a technology and then say, oh, now put some content in it. Actually, what's much stronger is to think about the content as the technology is being developed, and for the content to part drive the technology as well as the technology driving the content, and to think about those kinds of relationships. And that's very much, I think, a part of what is happening, seems to be happening in the city. There's another research institute that's just been started called Bristol Digital Futures Institute in Bristol at the university. And their whole thing is around socio-technical development. which is actually, rather than tech just being created and then it being kind of bunged into society, actually how far can society be much more drawn into the early stages of tech development so that technologies are much more appropriate and much more fit for use and much more democratic in a sense. And I guess that's a kind of ethos. So I feel like Brigstow is sort of a part of a bigger way of thinking in Bristol and Bath at the moment. I feel like we've had an important role to play in stimulating that, but we're also kind of part of that shift and change. There's a certain way of thinking about creative technologies in the city that excites me, and I hope can be a bit of a model, for other places as well.
Yeah, this is actually what I've been thinking about just while you were talking, because here in the US, my understanding is that this kind of partnership is more developed in the industry than academia, and academia should actually catch up and try to break these silos, because AI cannot be actually built otherwise. And in particular, language technologies have to catch up with this kind of initiatives. So I'm really, really impressed with the work at the Brigstow Institute. Really love that. So this is,
I mean, I think you're right there. I mean, I think my sense is this is a place where maybe there's things happening in the UK that are ahead of the US within the academy. And it's kind of hard to know why that is. I mean, I think partly there's been maybe more emphasis upon this within the funding bodies. So I think the UK funding bodies have really pushed this to the fore, that there's a lot more emphasis upon impact from research, maybe especially within the arts and humanities in the UK. You're right that I think, look at, I work a lot in the US, and I have a lot in my main research areas, I have a lot of collaborations within the US. And I think there's still a relative conservatism maybe within the arts and humanities within the US that still tends to be dominated by sole scholarship, not even team working, let alone, radical interdisciplinarity. And there's real values to that. There's some real values to that kind of way of working. But I think one of the things we talk about quite a lot within the UK context, and this is something we talk a lot about in Brigstow, is the importance of academics pivoting to become, we talk about T-shaped academics, especially within the arts and humanities. And I think that's someone who's got a very deep disciplinary knowledge. That's the kind of stem of the T, if you like. We're thinking capital T here. So the kind of upright of the T is this really deep, rich academic knowledge, which I think is generated, through the PhD program, and maybe in the arts and humanities through the first monograph, and maybe through a second sole-authored monograph, through those sort of lone sole ways of working that tend to dominate within the arts and humanities still. And I think in interdisciplinary work and in work with external partners, you need to bring something to the table. You've got to bring something which is rooted in that deep disciplinary knowledge and understanding of content and of methods and approaches, of ways of framing research. But I think one thing we've really talked about a lot is to develop academics as people who are also T-shaped, who have a broader top as well, that's where you can do the connections, which is where you can broaden out, that you can reach out to others who are also T-shaped, and you can start to connect. And you do that by drawing upon the disciplinary knowledge, but actually maybe playing more to the kind of methods and approaches and research sensibilities and ways of framing questions, of not just thinking narrowly about your expertise, but about broadening out your expertise. And in a sense, not to push the analogy, Brigstow is named after the Old English for Bristol. Bristol used to be called Brigstow. It literally means place of the bridge, with the idea that what happened in Bristol is that once a bridge was built, the two sides of the river were connected. And so there was social, cultural, economic growth as a result. And I guess in a sense, that's what we're always doing, is we're trying to find T-shaped people and we're trying to bridge them together. We're trying to connect them. We're trying to find the people who want to play with others, the people who realize that actually digging down as deep as they might, they're not going to necessarily answer every question that they have or every question that faces us as societies. And so we're trying to bring those people together, and we're trying to be the connector and then the facilitator of what they do. And we really do that. We've developed a sort of set of methods to do that. We try and connect people. We try and give them some money to start finding a common shared research interest. We give them some money to make something together. We give them some money to reflect on what they've learned and to co-write and to write a grant. So we've kind of a series of mechanisms to try and take those people who are starting to broaden out a little bit, maybe at the top, and to connect them and then to see what they achieve.
Yes, so there are many challenges to that, as you said. So institutional practices, how to get tenure, how to do traditional research in a particular discipline. But the community actually has been moving in this direction. And we see this not only in the US, obviously in the UK, but also slowly in the US, as well as in other parts of the world. So there is a lot of hope. And in fact, this is one of the reasons for which we have this podcast. So this is great, Tim. How can our listeners learn more about the Institute, its programs, and where they can find you?
If you just Google Brigstow, Brigstow, we should be the first hit that appears. It's either us or a hotel, depending on your configuration, but it should be us. Or you can find us at www.bristol.ac.uk/Brigstow. So we're just based at the University of Bristol in the UK, and you can find me there, Tim Cole. If you just search Tim Cole Bristol or Tim Cole Brigstow, then you'll find me as well. So do get in touch if you've got more questions. What you'll find on our website is you'll find a kind of a way of searching through our projects. So you'll be able to explore the range of projects that bring all sorts of diverse people together to explore ideas. You'll find a lot of the resources and the outputs that they've generated and created. You'll find some of the resources and outputs that we've created. One of the things we've been working on in particular more recently is a set of Creative Commons toolkits to help people who are stepping out into this kind of way of working. So those might be a great place to get started to use, and we're really hoping that people can use those and they'll be helpful in interdisciplinary and co-produced research across the world.
Thank you so much, Tim. This is great. I've been so inspired by your work and the work at the Brigstow Institute. And I hope our listeners actually are inspired by this episode, by this show as well. Thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Thank you so much. It's been really lovely chatting with you.